Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to Avasan's digital forum on exploring responsible AI, managing risk and governance in a complex ecosystem. For decades, AI has powered enterprise innovation, be it intelligent automation or predictive analytics, but still, responsible AI remained largely on the sidelines, understood by a few and prioritized by even fewer. Only the most digitally mature enterprises, they invested early on integrating RAI frameworks into their AI deployments. But to be honest, that landscape has shifted dramatically in just the past 2 years. With the rapid adoption of GenAI tools that we use day in, day out, ChatGPT, Gemini, it has really redefined the risk parameter. We're now contending not just with the ethical concerns we had earlier, like bias or transparency, but we are also dealing with new risks around hallucination, IP leakage, cybersecurity risks, and the list just goes on. So the urgency to embed responsibility by design is even greater now. So today we bring together industry leaders to unpack the evolving dimensions of responsible AI, from ethical design to accountability, compliance, and much more. But before we do that, let me showcase some of the research we have done in this domain. Next slide, please. So our research shows that while responsible AI maturity varies widely, there is a growing recognition right at the top. Over 44% of enterprises, they have instituted C-level oversight by either appointing a chief AI officer or maybe, mandating, extending the mandate of existing data and tech leaders to oversee the ethics and compliance in ongoing AI implementations. Most organizations, they have embraced a top-down approach to governance. Centralized RAI committees are being formed, which comprises of IT, business, legal, and compliance folks. So these guys, they are, vetting the use cases that are being prioritized. They are enforcing enterprise-wide guardrails. And it also includes a lot of access protocols, regulatory alignment, risk thresholds, and a framework of continuous monitoring that they are forming as part of the audit trails and, of course, the contingency plans. What we really see based on a conversation with enterprise leaders, responsible AI is no longer a checklist item. It is day in, day out, it's becoming a foundational discipline. Like, how do you scale your AI sustainably, securely, and also in alignment with the organizational values? So today we'll explore the many dimensions of responsible AI, from preparing enterprise data, ensuring ethical compliance, to addressing the environmental impact and accountability frameworks. We are joined by a distinguished panel of experts who bring deep real-world experience to this conversation. We are honored to have Julia Badmesser, Vipul Nagrath, and Akshay Khanna. Julia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Julia Bartmesser and I lead company called Data for Real and I'm distinguished fellow at Avasant. I've spent over 25 years leading data and technology transformation initiatives in the large financial services companies such as Citi, Deutsche Bank, and Voya Financial. And I'm very much focused on how do you get business value out of AI data in a responsible and ethical way.
Next, we welcome Vipul Nagrath.
Hello, everyone. Vipul Nagrath. I'm formerly the global CIO at ADP, and then also held a role as head of product development for our largest product in the company. Prior to ADP, I was the global CIO, head of technology at Bloomberg. And I've spent really close to 20 years, or actually over 20 years now, focused on AI, machine learning, and various different technologies to manage data and very, very large amounts of data, both from a Bloomberg perspective and my days at ADP as well. And I'm currently a distinguished fellow with Avasant.
Akshay?
Thanks so much, Chandrika. So hello everyone. My name is Akshay Khanna. I'm a managing partner with Avasant. Really pleased to be here. I wear a couple of different hats at Avasant. I focus one on the research and data business at Avasant, where of course, among several different technologies, we do cover AI and quantum and cyber and several other technologies. The other hat that I wear is I lead what we call as Avasant Labs, which is where we've led with building out a number of solutions and products to support our clients from a consulting advisory perspective. And we're doing for the last 3 to 4 years very extensive work on embedding AI in a lot of work that we do, including generative AI and now more and more on the agentic AI. So look forward to sharing some of those perspectives as we're seeing it both from supporting larger enterprises as well as what we are seeing in our own experience.
Thank you everyone for being with us today. So let's just dive right in. With AI models like ChatGPT increasingly being integrated into enterprise workflows and consumer applications, concerns around data privacy and legal accountability, they are increasing. Conversations that were, once thought to be private, they may carry legal consequences, as announced by Sam Altman. And also models, they can unintentionally reveal sensitive information from the training data, or they can be manipulated to do so. So Julia, in a scenario like this, how should enterprises navigate the dual challenge of safeguarding user privacy in, let's say, conversational AI systems, while also redefining internal governance policies around what really, counts as secure, protected dialogue within their AI-enabled environments?
And on top of it, also to improve user experience and bring value to the company, right? So it's all of that together. And one of the interesting things about AI, and again, having been in this industry for a really long time and having used, from quants to machine learning to now Gen AI, one of the things that I'm observing is Gen AI specifically, and the issue that you're highlighting, Chandrika, has a kitchen window effect, meaning that a lot of the mess that we used to have behind the scenes that we could kind of paper over up front is now very visible. That's number one. The second one, it's a lot of disciplines that were previously separate around data are now coming together. So some of this, Chandrika, is the question is about information security. Information security generally has been a separate discipline from data management. So if you were doing machine learning, or if you were doing, way back, I'm betraying my age here, quants on Wall Street, it was all around analytics and data management, was not as much about security. Now with Gen AI, with AI-enabled chatbots, you have the whole security consideration that comes in. Then you have do you have rights to the data? Are you using the right data? Are you using it in the right way? So that's a data management discipline. And then you have on top of it, a lot of the information that you bring in that you both need to have security, access, and usability is unstructured data. And unstructured data has been a purview of records management discipline that usually is also considered separately from data management. So this is very interesting. So on one hand, you have Gen AI, and especially agentic AI, even more so, opening up the window into everything that's happening with data. And everything that happens with data is in fact everything from security to usability, data management, to records management. So it's a very challenging space, which is why I see a lot of companies we want to use AI, but hold on a second, can we? And what do we need to do with data? So there is this a little bit of FOMO, fear of missing out, but on the other hand, like how do you deal with all of those considerations? So there isn't a one answer fits all, but bringing those disciplines together and making sure they move in the right way together is, to me, at least the big part of the beginning of that answer.
Got it. So
Julia,
basically, Yeah.
Sorry, something. I was just going to add to what Julie you're saying there is basically what I'm one of the things that brings about is what's called security by design. So
Mhm.
we can't come into this late. We can't come into it afterwards, right? We have to, as you just said, we've got to understand the data and the processes, the agentic AI as well as the generative AI right up front, and have that security built in by design up front, or trying to do it at a later stage, which I think often, and in the past we have done, will be too late.
Yeah.
Right.
Actually, that's a huge point, Vipul, and I'm a big proponent of data quality by design versus data quality after the fact, which is where a lot of data quality initiatives end up being. So we will check stuff, but before we use it, if you do it, it's A, more expensive, B, it becomes much easier for things to fall through. And you can't really do metadata management, which is data rights. Do you have rights to this data? What is the privacy of this data? It's very difficult to do after the fact. So creating this AI readiness, which includes security, quality, data rights by design upfront, is a huge part of this answer.
Right. It's interesting you talk about data quality and management by design, because based on, our conversations with providers day in, day out, what they've been saying is that 40% of their data transformations, they're related to, getting the data right for AI, right? Unstructured data, how do we maximize the use of that when building an AI model, or how do we bake in the security? So I think the market is also in alignment with, what you're saying. Vipul, maybe you can tell me, as we move past, concerns solely around model training, to a more complex wave of AI litigation, which focuses on how AI is used or misused or even weaponized. We are seeing landmark cases like New York Times versus OpenAI, and some initiatives like Cloudflare's paper crawl, stance. It is really reshaping the whole data rights landscape, right? With more public domain data being gated or monetized, enterprises face mounting pressure to rely more heavily on internal or customer owned data for AI training. Now, given these dynamics, how do you see enterprises striking the right balance between generally available data and proprietary data, especially when the volume, or let's say the quality of the internal data, is lacking? And do you also feel that synthetic data is a viable bridge to fill this gap, or does it really open new layers of, let's say, legal or operational risks?
So there's a few different things to unpack in over there. One, I just want to start with a larger framework, right? And my own experience. In my experience, the companies that I've come from, the proprietary data is what's key. The public data was, I won't say useless, but it's no, we don't want to rely on the public data. It was very much about the curated private data that we have. And there's two aspects, like from as a data provider, someone like Bloomberg, you do have it's public-private data, meaning it's data that's coming from exchanges, but at the end of the day, you as a customer still have to pay to get access to that data. And so, if we're building algorithms that is pulling in all that data and giving information to people who don't have rights to it, well, you've got a problem, right? From an ADP perspective, there are some things that you can do from a non-attributed benchmark perspective. But then there's other things that you as a company, so if you're a customer of ADP and you've got your own HR data, and HR data is extremely sensitive. There's sensitive data and extremely sensitive data, right? Or very sensitive data. And that data, again, you have to have the rights to it. And so you may want to use machine learning and your AI algorithms, but only on your data. It doesn't matter what the company next to you. In fact, you don't want your competitors' data mixed in with your data. That would be really bad. Okay. So there's an area of where you need benchmarks that you're looking at everyone's data, but it has to be completely non-attributed. Now I say non-attributed for the end user, but for us as a provider and a curator of that data, it all has to be governed with the right provenance. I've got to have data traceability. If I don't have data traceability, then I don't actually have confidence in the data or confidence in the algorithms and confidence in the output that comes from it. So you've got to have the provenance the whole way and understand that provenance. Okay. And then, once you have that, then you've got the ultimate confidence in what you're doing. And it's not just you, it's your clients. Your clients have to have the confidence in that data too. Otherwise, why are they doing this? Now, I think a larger framework, and one that I most recently used when I was we all use at ADP, was the very first thing before we went really crazy with generative AI inside all of our products and where do you go, was we first built an AI ethics committee. And that AI ethics committee consisted of legal folks, consisted of the chief data officer, and it actually even consisted of people, outside the company, so we can get an outside perspective. And it was not just an internal perspective only, that are we being too myopic in what we're talking about, the management of data. And then we had to very much include different parts of the world. The data rights and the data rights management that you get in Europe versus the US or versus other countries are vastly different. And then even within this country, states like California, which are going further in privacy rights, adds an added layer of complexity as well too. So um, from all my experience, it's always been on that proprietary data. So the I think part of your question was on that publicly available data. Well, that publicly available data, it was great for some training and getting it going, but then we had to dump it, right? And it was maybe just good for testing, but at the end of the day, it was the algos have to be used, and the generative AI has to be used on our data and the data of our customers. And so, using that synthetic data, fine. That synthetic data is great as I'm testing things in the lab, as I'm building it. But it's all got to be pulled out. In my view, in my opinion, it's all got to be pulled out before you go to anything that's client facing, customer facing, because you don't want any of that to leak in there. Because if it does leak in there, it actually will create issues, and you'll get hallucinations that you don't want. And sometimes it's tough, but we went to clients and saying, you don't have enough data. You, Mr. Or Mrs. Client, thank you, client, but you don't actually have enough data for this service that we wanted to use on your data. And so therefore, when you have more data, we can come back to you, but right now you don't. And so this service won't work for you.
Right. It's really a double-edged sword, while you need proprietary data to, customize it to your needs and also to differentiate, from your competitors. At the same time, you need to manage, as you mentioned, data rights, which is going to be very critical. Yeah.
I think if I could add, Chandrika, to that, I think just to echo Vipul your points, I think the biggest unlock from a Gen AI perspective has to happen when you start going into the proprietary data. And I think we still kind of at the very beginning stage of just kind of scratching the surface. So I think a lot of those unknowns are still out there, because how do you even, like you said, utilize parts of customer data, and is it even significant to be able to run those models at a level and quality that will meet the end customer experience and so forth.
Yeah.
And I think those they have to
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I think those challenges are just unfolding, and there then obviously you get into all of the things that I think, Julia, you were mentioning, which is from a contractual perspective, from a privacy perspective, from whose access and all of that. So I think it's just the kind of the tsunami on that is really, I think, yet to hit in a big way.
Yeah.
Sorry.
The point was, and that's an excellent point actually, because the value, so I have this notion of a value pyramid, AI value pyramid. And at the bottom of it is using externally trained models for writing your emails, making, summaries of your meetings and so on. It's fairly low risk. I mean, other than it's not writing a good email, so you kind of have to read your emails anyway as they go out. But it's also low hanging fruit, and it's not a differentiator. first mover advantage, but we all move that way. So there isn't even advantage anymore. You just got to, at this point, got to use it. As you go up value pyramid, your risk is increasing, your value is increasing, but your risk is increasing as well. And the demands on the internal data management very much is increasing as well. Because what you're talking about, Whipple, which is a great use case when you use internal data to provide value to your customers based on the data you have. So that's your differentiator. But it's data management requirements are huge, and the risks of unethical, irresponsible use are huge as well. So as always, gain and risk kind of go together. But I think people I think it doesn't entirely connect that. To get more value, you have to put more safeguards around the risks associated with Gen AI specifically.
Yeah. And sorry, I mean, I think that's a great point because, when we've looked at kind of working with our clients on this entire AI prioritization framework, you have to weigh in because obviously right now there's a lot of, really the gold rush on how many use cases can we identify, what all can be done. But when you really start to capture them, compile them, and you have to really look at it from a risk, from an value creation potential perspective, because you don't want to, embark on 500 different initiatives all at the same time. So that's where the risk, the reputational risk, the data risk, all of those come in compared to, what is the potential value that we can generate? Because obviously the value that you can generate with just an email summarizer or an email creator is low, but yes, it's also easily deployable. But as you go further on the axis, then the stakes get higher and higher.
Fair, but I think you also have to look at volume. One, I see there's a question from Jim on perfection. Look, like I think part of that perfection is what I'll say. It has to be, your solution has to be fit for purpose, right? So perfection, I mean, I like to say beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I think perfection is in the consumer, right? And what's perfect for you and your organization is not necessarily perfect for someone else. And go back to the point I was making on volume. I can give you an example of, if you've got a call center and a call center is taking millions, and I mean millions of calls a year. And let's just say on average, your call lasts about 10 minutes. Well, after that 10 minutes, there's about 2 minutes that are normally required in what's called after call work by agents to summarize that conversation. Now, if I could instead listen to that entire conversation, transcribe it from speech to text, and then take the text and summarize it, and then put the summary right back into the call notes, which is what humans do, right? I know we've found that. Like I've got personal experiences, so that takes about 10 to 12% off of every call. Now you just do this the numbers. Like if I use let's say it's $20 a call, and I've got 10 million calls a year, and I can take 20% of that away. Do that math. It's significant. So maybe it's simple, but the volume is so large, or maybe it sounds relatively simple, but the volume is so large that it actually is significant. And the reality is as for us, we're so close to it. Maybe that sounds simple and straightforward. For the people who are using it, they checked like crazy for the first 6 months, or they will check for the first 3 or 6 months that are those transcriptions correct. And then once they have confidence in those transcriptions, then they basically stop checking altogether.
Which is also not good.
Which is not good either. Exactly. We as humans, we go to these extremes. Either we have no confidence and we check everything, or we have this full confidence and we check nothing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So maybe just shifting gears to, the talk of the town, which is agentic AI. Akshay, you have a lot of experience in helping clients with this transformation. So my question to you is, as AI systems, they become increasingly, autonomous with the ability to adapt, collaborate, and also self-improve in real time, the traditional regulatory models, they are becoming outdated. So this really raises urgent questions about how do we govern AI that doesn't stand still. So what governance frameworks, how they need to evolve to manage the multi-agent, self-improving AI systems without, stifling with the innovation?
Yeah, so I think obviously that's kind of top of mind for everybody in terms of how you do it. So it's I think Julia and Vipul both talked about kind of you know secure by design, responsible by design. I think all of this has to be embedded from the get-go, not as an afterthought, and very much from the beginning. So I would say with by design and with a lot of strong intent from the leadership within the organizations. So there is a regulatory part of it, but I will come to that. But because I think to me, it has to start within the organization as you embark on these initiatives. Vipul, I think, and Julia both talked about having an ethics committee and things like that. So I think it's kind of needed from the get-go within the organization. And like you said, Chandrika, there is the historical regulatory frameworks are obviously designed for very fixed, very static type of initiatives that companies are doing. Here, where the entire premise of generative AI is that it is a probabilistic system, it's we don't even know what the next response is going to be. How do you regulate when it's just changing so dynamically? I mean, you put a query and I put the same query in, we are going to get two vastly different responses, right? And then when you open the Pandora's box, of proprietary data, then it's just, the floodgates will open. So I think there's a few things, as we've laid out in our research and frameworks that need to be embedded from the get-go. Those things, obviously it has to be a dynamic, ever-evolving system. So you can't be static. You have to have a multidisciplinary team looking at it. In fact, I think Khalid had a question on, how do you really look at accountability? So I think just on that, it has to be with all the stakeholders that are part of this kind of an initiative, which they will be, right from technology teams to data teams to security teams to the business, legal, all of that. So it has to be a very kind of distributed accountability, a lot of ongoing conversations that really help these organizations move forward more proactively rather than reactive, right? Because in this AI, Gen AI and agentic AI world, you can't really use regulatory frameworks as an afterthought with a checklist, right? You don't want this to be running as, okay, well, I've done my duty of just checking these box on a 100 questionnaire or whatever. And a few things really need to be whether it's explainability, transparency, fairness and inclusiveness in terms of how the outcomes are looking at. All of those have to be embedded from the get-go, and it's not perfect. I think it's a evolving machine that really you have to work on. The other there are, of course, I think some other best practices that we've learned from the times of crypto and blockchain. That can you do some regulatory sandboxing? Can you do safe, secure spaces where you can test some of this out and test this out? So I think those are another component of doing it. The other is, and I think there was a question I saw in the chat here. There has to be kind of a global view to it, but then also being very mindful of the local regulations in each of the countries that you're operating in, or each of the countries where you're serving your consumers. Because from an EU perspective versus US versus India versus somewhere else, you have to be very mindful of obviously looking at the local kind of laws and regulation, and they're evolving quite rapidly as well. So I think there's you have to be it has to obviously come from, first and foremost in my mind, come within the organization with a very clear strategic intent and embedding responsible AI principles and frameworks right from the get-go, and kind of catering to some of these, using these some of these more principle-based approach rather than a more kind of rule-driven approach.
Right.
Akshay, sorry, if I could just add one thing to that. And what I heard from there, right, is how when you talk about all the different groups coming together, this is a time when I think we're truly in a team sport. And in the past, if it was more individualistic, meaning it was an IT issue, like here's a system, go get it implemented. Here's email, it's IT's issue. Here's our ERP system, it's IT's issue, right? We're just going to use the functions and formulas in here. I think this is truly a different game now, where it truly is a team sport and no longer individual, and an individual department.
Absolutely. You can't
And
even
I
half the
think
time, or more than that, you can't even pinpoint where the issue. So just kind of triaging where the issue is, and that's exactly, I think you put it well. It's really as a team sport that has to come together, because we're still, I think, in the realm of a lot of unknowns when it comes to this.
so. Just coming back to the fragmented regulatory landscape, I think as the systemic impact of AI becomes, more clearer, governments are very quickly shifting from voluntary, principles to more binding mandates. In fact, our research shows that over 1,000 AI regulated regulations, they have been enacted across 70 countries. And I think in US alone, there were like 60 regulations last year. So the point, I'm trying to make, just reiterating the fact that the regulatory landscape is, of course, very fragmented. While some nations, they're prioritizing innovation, others are more focused on individual rights and safety. So maybe, Julia, you can help me answer this, that, given this divergence, what role should global collaboration play in defining responsible AI standards? And how can enterprises stay agile while navigating such a patchwork of regulations?
So let me talk about enterprises, because global cooperation, I think, a question that is so big and has so many other connotations to it that I'm going to set that aside. But for global enterprises, this is a really big issue or challenge. And I think somewhere in the comments, somebody talked about privacy. So what we're seeing with AI regulations is what exists with privacy already. So, Europe has very strong GDPR network framework, and then US has multitude of privacy regulations across multiple states, and then different countries have different privacy regulations. Then you have sovereignty requirements for global companies. So companies have been dealing with this. So AI, in that sense, unfortunately, is not different, because there are multitude of regulations and they're contradictory. And you have to, if you're a global company working with multiple countries, within multiple countries, you have to comply with all of those regulations. So one of them, again, I'm going to go over to what Vipul and I talked a little bit earlier, is it's putting that by design. So understanding where the data is coming from, because a lot of privacy, where your clients are, where the data is coming from, where is it residing, what are the requirements, changing requirements to that. That has to be put in by design. Doing it after the fact, especially for the large global companies, is incredibly challenging. So thinking about, and I'm going to go very data geeky here, metadata by design. So as you receive data, you need to know where it's coming from, what country, what client, and being able to tie regulations to that is, I think, the only way of dealing with this efficiently. AI is, in and of itself, brings huge promise, but there are costs associated with that. But that's what regulations do, right? They make certain things more complex and more costly to reduce the systemic risk of them. So you have to manage that cost. And again, doing that, building that by design upfront versus trying to draft it on top of existing flows is the only approach I can see working long term. Chandrika, you're mute.
Sorry. So there are a bunch of interesting questions from the audience, but before we jump into that, Vipul, maybe let's just try and address this conversation around responsible AI, which needs to be measured more holistically, right? So far, we've just been centered on ethics, bias, fairness. So beyond ethics, do we encompass the environmental cost, labor practices, the long-term societal impact? I mean, are we truly being responsible if we focus only on the bias and the fairness angle, and while we sit and ignore carbon footprint or invisible labor that goes behind labeling the data?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And this is something a little bit near and dear to my heart as well. So in addition to my other daytime and part-time roles, I'm also a founding board member of sustainableIT.org. And this organization is now about 3 years old. And we very recently published a paper, and in fact, a full toolkit on responsible AI. And so responsible AI goes past just, as you said, the provenance of the data itself, the privacy issues. It does also go into environmental issues. It's just a reality right now with the proliferation of generative AI, with uh, NVIDIA doing as well as it's doing, and that's great for NVIDIA and great for us. The reality is that generative AI itself takes a lot of power. It takes a lot of power. It takes a lot of cooling. It takes a lot of water. And if you were to give you just a quick example, if you were to do, let's say, a simple, traditional simple Google search, and let's say that's the baseline, and that's using, the baseline of zero. If you were to do that same search using generative AI or use an AI assistant to do that same search, you could be burning or using as much as 6 gallons of water just to cool the chips to run that search, right? So where we are today is we're actually quite inefficient. Over time, do I think we're going to get a lot more efficient and a lot greener? Yes, but right now we are fairly inefficient. And the way that things are today and the way that they're proliferating today, we don't have enough power in the world for all the demands, for all the various things that people want to do with generative AI and compute and everything else that's going on in the world today. So I very wholeheartedly believe that responsible AI, you have to look past just the things we've talked about to this point. You also have to look at how much cooling are you using? How much power are you using? Yeah, I think you even have to, I think we're going to have to become much better actually at coding, not worse. And inside that coding, we are going to have standards on the sustainability of your coding. And we're going to have to go examine and saying, hey, I wrote this piece of code which had had so many MIPS, millions of instructions per second, and this other which was 20% less, and I'm getting the same results. Or in many cases, you know what? It turns out I don't need generative AI. I can actually just do a simple structured query, and I don't need an unstructured, AI or any generative AI on that at all. I just need a simple query. Use that. So I don't think it's a one size fits all. I think you have to actually understand your workloads and then set that up. But absolutely, to truly be responsible, you've got to take the environmental impacts into account as well. And we're in early days, yet we're already seeing and we're hearing a lot of how, 20 years ago, is let's see, schools in the US, 25 years ago, all schools in the US kept telling people go into coding, go into coding, go into coding. Well, right now, if generative AI can do my coding for me, then what do I tell the future generation? Right. So, and where's the responsibility over there too? So we have societal impact responsibility, we have environmental impact responsibility, and then of course all just the ethical responsibility as well too.
Right. So
You
it's a
know, little
holistic
dog.
responsibility coming from the board,
Yeah.
which I think Akshay also alluded to in one of his responses here. So Akshay, maybe, you can help me understand that, how do we really ensure that ethical responsibility in AI is internalized by all stakeholders rather than, it being reduced to checklists or reactive policies aimed only at mitigating the systemic risks?
Yeah, so I think again, kind of building off of where Vipul was saying, I think it is really a holistic view to look at all of these considerations. Again, going back to some of those basic principles, right? You don't want um, ethics to be driven more as a compliance. It is really needs to be embedded more into the conscious of the organization so that everybody is understanding it and living it. Now, it's a very abstract concept. So how do you really go about kind of getting people to understand first of all, and then obviously follow it. So I think, again, goes back to uh, ensuring that it is driven top down from a culture perspective, from a structural and org design perspective, that organizations and leaders are really enabling it to be done from that perspective, and then also from a incentives um, perspective on, again, doing the right thing, right? It is all about, can you do the right thing, as they say, when nobody's watching. So it's a lot of it is just embedding those ethics into the day-to-day fabric of the organization, and not really, again, running this as a compliance checklist item, right? Because that way it's not going to just um, kind of scale. So I think that's kind of one fundamental way to look at it. You have to drive it really into culture, into kind of each and every part of the organization. Because going back again, we talk about AI, and as people say, right, I think we're doing AI to help humans really capture their full potential, right? It is to enable humans to do more. So you can't, think of this without the humans. And in terms of whether it's accountability that needs to be taken at an individual level, I think we've already seen some questions on, well, how do I really drive accountability across these different teams? Vipul and I were chatting about different teams. So that's a very common organizational issue. Well, how can I do it? So you have to get past it. You have to rise above it. You have to really ensure that each individual is empowered to do it, raise their hand, and all of that is done. And that ways, then it is really each individual is then taking that ownership and responsibility on seeing if they're seeing something wrong, then they can raise their hand, they can do something about it. And that goes back to that structuring within the organization. Of course, I think as the space is evolving, it has to be fairly dynamic and kind of quick in terms of decision making. So obviously, one fine day you can have, and we saw this kind of early days of Gen AI, and it was not even called vibe coding back then, but you take a piece of code from GitHub Copilot or somewhere else, and then suddenly you've introduced vulnerabilities into your system, and so on and so forth. So it's you by the time it gets to even a committee or whatever, it's too late. The damage has already been done. So how do you really empower people up and down kind of the chain that's there? So I think it's kind of, again, you have to permeate it through the culture, through the organization. And the last thing I would say is, you don't want to, again, because we were just talking about sustainability as well, Vipul. The last thing you want to do is, just like, we had greenwashing happening. You don't want, like, AI ethics washing happening. Oh, well, we've this committee and that committee. You really have to kind of embed it deep down. Each individual is kind of living it on a day-to-day basis. And and then, of course, you can kind of carry a, hopefully you can see some kind of a meaningful, thoughtful design and kind of approach to embedding AI into everything that we do.
Right. So whatever you just mentioned is more like an ideal scenario. But coming back to reality, what are those common roadblocks you see enterprises facing when they operationalize responsible AI? Is it people, process, or technology? And Vipul and Julia, based on your interactions with enterprises, feel free to chime in.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's always people to start with. And that's why what like Akshay is saying, that having it as part of the culture. And this started to me even, going back, we have a statistic that 70% of digital transformation initiatives fail. Why is that? Is that a technology fail? Well, no, not really. It's not a technology fail. It's a culture fail. Because when you have a transformation, digital transformation in this case, it changes how you do business within the company. So AI transformation, whatever we end up defining it, because it's still very much early days, it's cultural transformation first. It's approach to how you do your business. It's how you make decisions. And again, it's a lot of disciplines coming together. So I'm going back to the first point I made, is that to make AI successful, a lot of disciplines have to come together with ethics and regulations. One of the points I wanted to make is that it's very common to conflate ethical AI and complying with the regulations. There is an overlap, but those are two different things. not all regulations in all countries are focused on good of the humanity, or maybe humanity overall, but not any specific person. So being ethical goes into the vision of your company. And again, for me, it's the culture. So I'm not going to actually make an excellent point there, and I don't want to repeat all of that he said. Regulatory approach is more risk-based approach, and you have to account for those risks. So it's risk related to the business. So, but just because you comply with all the regulations doesn't mean that you're using AI in an ethical manner. Those are two different things.
Yeah, and I'd add, and I think it's some of the questions that have been popping up in here too. As Akshay said, it's everywhere in the organization, must permeate. So that's from, the person who joined yesterday, all the way up to board chairs and to the board. And it has to be everyone in between the board, the CEO, the CEO's managers, the leaders under those managers, and then the team members under those leaders. It's really got to permeate everywhere through the organization. And in order to get there, you first have to, and normally it starts with the top, right? And in fact, it usually will start with the top in setting the direction and in setting the framework in what people are allowed to do or not do. Then at the same time, there's going to be a natural gravity. There's going to be a pull, right? I mean, I think many of us face this in our organizations. About 2.5 years, nearly 3 years back, when Gen AI went public domain or went out to everyone, is the first thing everyone did say, hey, at home I can go and use Gen AI and use Chat GPT. I'm going to come here to work and use Chat GPT, and many companies had to quickly put out statements and saying don't do it, and we had to find ways to actually block it, because the results that were coming out of there could potentially have their own, there could be bad stuff in those results, right? Whether it's copyright infringement or other pieces. And so you didn't want someone, and worse yet, again, I come back to the customer service example. Your folks in your customer service would go take a question, or they could take a question, put it in a Chat GPT and get an answer. And they may have very innocently and unknowingly exposed specific client data into that Chat GPT. And now that's part of Chat GPT, right?
Yeah.
So there was that pull that was coming, but it had to be up from the top. It's like, here's what you can do and what you can't do. And by the way, this is not permanent. We're going to change our stance in 1 month and in 3 months and in 6 months. And we have to, because it's evolving so quickly.
Yeah. So if I could just add, I think Vipul, to your point, I think, and Julia also, and some of this may sound very difficult to do or hard to do, but I don't think it really needs to be that. And just like I think, a few decades ago, we had Japanese companies, American companies really, or German companies adopt really quality as a mantra, right? Then everybody in the organization, Vipul, to your point, up top to down, was really focused on quality, right? And that's goes to building that customer trust, right? So if I am a consumer of a particular car or a CPG product or a retail chain, the organization is earning my trust by being consistent and repeatable on the brand promise or the things that they stand for. And I think the ethics part of AI is really something very similar to me in this new context. If you really embed it, there are organizations which have really embedded quality really as their core, and consumers identify those brands with quality or whatever their chosen principles are. So I think this is very similar. You have to really be kind of very, very intentional, very structured about it, and kind of invest in it from that mindset that this really becomes a very core element of what we stand for as an organization. So I think that's the way that successful organizations will eventually end up kind of standing for it.
Yeah. There is a lot of opportunity for differentiation in this space.
Yes.
On both, and taking the longer term view. So one of the things is don't give in to FOMO. Don't try to do something just for the sake of doing it. And again, it doesn't have to be, and I know what I say, doing it by design, and you look at your really large enterprise technology and data and processes stack, and like, okay, how am I going to do this by design? But it's where is the high value? What can you do well? And what serves the vision and the strategy of your company? And it ends up not having to do 100% of the things. It's quite doable, and then you build on it.
Absolutely.
Right. I think we've discussed a lot around, the aspects that are really important to the industry, to the, enterprises from responsible AI perspective. But there's an emerging threat which is, growing from a society perspective. So as AI systems, they are becoming more personalized, emotionally responsive, and a lot more socially interactive. We are beginning to see people form genuine bonds, or you can say, friendships or even relationships with these technologies. Now, while this opens up new possibilities for, let's say, mental health support or even companionship, it also raises serious questions about emotional dependency, and also manipulation. So, as a closing question, to all the panelists, I would like to know, as this AI, relationship becomes more lifelike, where should we draw the ethical line between emotional support and emotional simulation, and how do we safeguard users from unintended psychological consequences?
So I'm gonna step in. I'm gonna try, and then you guys jump in. So I've read actually quite a bit about this. I had to tell Claude to please stop telling me how wonderful every single say I tell you is. I've been trying to plan a vacation, and I'm planning Costa Rica trip, and I'm getting feedback that my questions are the most brilliant questions ever. So I had to say, like, stop with it, just the facts, please. But having said that, there is so a lot of people don't have access to mental care. This is something that's not easy. It's very expensive. So there is a very appropriate and potentially life-changing use of AI, of Gen AI, of chatbots to help people overcome issues. Because again, the access to mental care, health care is very difficult, and finding a good therapist and all of that is very, very complex. So that really lowers the barrier to people getting care. So this is, and it could be very effective. There are studies right now that people have said that it's actually can be quite effective. Of course, as everything else that we do as humans, on one hand, there is a plus, and on the other hand, there is a potential of manipulation. It's not a question that we actually have solved. Forget AI, like all of the social networks, all of those likes that you get when you post that build more and more engagement from you and make you dependent on it. We haven't solved that, have we? Like we had a lot of fracturing in these different societies because people get segregated in smaller and smaller teams, and they get much more focused on their own ideas and not able to hear other sides of the story. We haven't solved that. I don't know, like we do need to solve it because with Gen AI, this is all of this on steroids. So on one hand, I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, saying nobody should go to ChatGPT or to your favorite bot for support, because again, that could be incredibly important for people. On the other hand, as a society, we ought to solve the problem that we have started way back, with the first likes on Facebook and all the algorithms that make you want to keep getting more and more dopamine hits.
Yeah, I'll just jump on that, Julia. I'm very curious to see, actually, Chandrika, right? I'm myself very curious to see where this all goes. And I think I don't want to repeat everything Julia said, but I think she's so right. Like we've already seen the algorithms that feed you more of what you already like, right? So we know the thing is, actually, I think it's a good thing in that we know that that's an issue. Now that we know that's an issue, we can find ways as a society and certainly as technologists, we can find ways to go and address that, right? Because it's actually a known issue. We've already seen it. It's harder when it's unseen, when it's unknown. Now, what the next horizon will be unknown, and I'm curious to see what that next horizon will be, and then we'll have to go solve those problems. But at least I have hope that in the issues and the problems that we've seen, that we will be able to go address them. At minimum, we've got to do the simple things today and saying, hey, please understand you are talking to a bot. You are not talking to a human. But on the other hand, we as humans want to feel that connection. And if we don't feel that connection and it felt very robotic, so to speak, and it felt like a bot, we actually wouldn't use it. So there's this part of the trust that we humans have in these services is the fact that they are personalized, that they actually have a persona to them, personification. And if they didn't have that personification, we wouldn't use them as much. On the flip side, yes, that personification can be pushed to an extreme where potentially harmful things could happen.
Yeah.
Any
So again,
closing thoughts? Yeah.
So no, I think Julian Vipul kind of touched upon it. Again, I do also see, I think there's a lot of potential and promise, whether it's in mental health, whether it's in elder care, whether it's in kind of some of the other issues. But like we were talking earlier, this is one of those things which is very high reward, high risk, because it's kind of very high stakes, right? When AI is already showing that emotion and empathy, right? I mean, it's not obviously fully sentient and so on and so forth, but when it tells a Julia or I that, oh, well, you're doing great and you're the best thing, or you have the best questions or the best approaches, you feel good. I mean, that's obviously you start to build that bond, right? But there is a very, very thin line from there on to, again, if it crosses the line and what it can or it won't do. So I think I agree. I think we'll see how it plays out, because Julia, I will take it even one step further. I don't even know if we know all the ramifications of social media overuse. I think we're still uncovering what all social media can do. Some of those issues have uncovered, even though social media has been around now for maybe 2 decades. Some of these issues we are exploring only in the last 4 or 5 years, right? So it'll be interesting, I think, how it evolves. But again, we have our lessons learned from the entire 2 decades of social media and how that's played and informed into people's psyche. So I think a few things we do understand. It has to have transparency from the get-go. Like Vipul said, being very clear that this is, an AI system or a bot that you're dealing with, not a human, even though it may seem very human-like. It has to have a lot more responsibility from the organizations that are driving these kind of platforms or solutions in terms of what data and how they use it and so on and so forth. So I think the bar for responsible AI and ethical AI for them is even higher in this case. And then, of course, I think the government regulation, I think, will also play a role in this, because when you're really playing with emotions and mental health concerns of individuals, loneliness issues and all of that, it can have very serious ramifications if not dealt with correctly. So.
Well, thank you so much to all the panelists, and also big thanks to everyone who tuned in today and made the session more engaging. And stay tuned for more thought leadership in AI.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.